Back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlewoman from Wyoming is recognized.
First of all, the non-delegation doctrine is a constitutional provision indicating that the legislative branch does not have the authority to delegate our legislative authority to administrative agencies. So what the ranking member is suggesting is unconstitutional in and of itself. With that said, I'd just like to provide some very specific statistics from the 10,000 Commandments from 2022 published by the Competitive Enterprise Institute. Federal spending surged to $6.822 trillion in 2021. These federal outlays are projected to reach $5.872 trillion in fiscal year 2022. The burden of regulatory regulation is equivalent to 33% of these projected federal outlays. Regulatory costs of $1.927 trillion amounts to 8% of the U.S. gross domestic product, which is estimated at $23.99 trillion for 2021. When regulatory costs are combined with federal outlays of $6.822 trillion in 2021, the federal government's share of the entire economy reached at least 36%. If it were a country, U.S. regulation would be the world's 8th largest economy, not counting the U.S., but ranking behind France and ahead of Italy. The regulatory or hidden tax associated with the regulatory burden exceeds individual income taxes by several billion dollars. If one assumed that all costs of federal regulation flowed all the way down to households, U.S. households would pay $14,684 annually on average in a hidden regulatory tax. That amounts to 17% of the average pre-tax income of $84,000. The regulatory tax exceeds every item in the household budget except housing. That means a typical American household spends more on embedded regulation costs than on health care, food, transportation, entertainment, apparel, services, or savings. Trump's total of 2,964 final rules in 2019 was the lowest count since records began being kept in the 1970s and is the only tally below 3,000. During calendar year 2021, while agencies issued 3,257 rules, Congress enacted only 143 laws. Thus, agencies issued 23 rules for every law enacted by Congress. This unconstitutionality index, which is the ratio of regulations issued by agencies to laws passed by Congress and signed by the president, highlights the entrenched delegation of lawmaking power to unelected agency officials. President Biden had the highest number of pages in the Federal Register of over 95,894 pages. In 2021, the Federal Register contained 74,532 pages of regulations. Since 1993, when the first edition of 10,000 Commandments was published, agencies have issued 114,821 final rules. Of the 95,848 final rules issued since the Congressional Review Act passed in 1996 under President Bill Clinton, there's been a revocation of just 20 rules. The Weidenbaum Center at Washington University in St. Louis and the George Washington University Regulatory Studies Center in Washington, D.C. jointly estimate that agencies spent $78 billion in fiscal year 2020 just to administer and police the federal administrative apparatus. At the end of calendar year 2021, 2,094 proposed rules had been published in the Federal Register, 272 of them deemed significant, which the federal government defines as those rules having an annual economic effect of $100 million or more. The reality is that we are not being governed by the legislative branch, by the people who are accountable to the American citizens, to those who are elected pursuant to our Constitution and our laws. It is the unelected bureaucrats that are dictating the laws in this country. I support the REINS Act. I support the amendment. It is time that Congress took back its rightful constitutional authority to legislate, and we need to take it away from unelected bureaucrats who are abusing the power that this body has illegally granted to them. And with that,
please yield to me, Ms. Hageman.